Good morning. Welcome to another day of Aurum podcast. We are very happy to be here with you. Today, we are just myself and my HR consultant partner. My name is Anthony Kuria, and my colleague here, Zipporah Kuria, is joining me today. And yes, this is Aurum Consultants podcast. Aurum Consultant is a HR and risk advisory firm, and we are very glad that you could be able to join with us today. And yes, Zippy, karibu sana.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yes, so today it's just me and you in this podcast today, and we want today to discuss something that we normally do here all the time. One of the things that we would say it's bread and butter of what we do. And we want to talk about HR policies. HR policies. Now, let's get right into it. Now, lots of people when they think about HR, whether they are employees, whether they are managers, whether they are business owners, whether they are people applying for jobs. It's always an issue of now what has HR got to do with me. So, Zippy, give us some hints. Give us an overview of what HR policies are all about.
Thank you, Anthony. I think simply put, HR policies would be guidelines or principles and rules that govern employees and employers. And if I was to make it or give a more definition, I would say these are guidelines on the approach of which an organization intends to adopt managing its people, or rules of conduct which govern the organization in its relationship with its employees. So we have on one part the labor employment laws, but we also need to look at other different angles of our businesses and see where are there gaps that we need to bridge by making sure we have HR policies that would govern the conduct, that would govern the procedures we would take on different issues that would arise on the day-to-day managing of the business. Okay. I would say HR policies do not work independently. HR policies work hand in hand with the employment laws of the country. So you cannot just take HR policies and say, this is what is going to govern us, and completely ignore employment laws. HR policies are anchored on the Employment Act. So of course you look at various aspects that might not necessarily be covered in the Employment Act, but it affects your business in the way you run your business. For instance, if I was to look on some of the issues, how do you recruit, for instance? That might not necessarily be defined in the Employment Act. What procedures you would take as an organization to do recruitment for your organization. So you come up with policies and say, this is a procedure we take. This is how we do our own internal recruitment. This is how we handle our own internal issues. So basically, these are guidelines and these are principles that guide us as we do day-to-day running our businesses and how we interact with our employees, how they conduct themselves, and even how we conduct ourselves as employers.
Okay, so basically what we are saying is when it comes to HR policies, we have what is statutory requirements by the government, the employee and the labor laws that have been instituted by the government of Kenya. So there is the issue of compliance with that. That becomes the basis of what we work with. And then now, as a company, as an institution, then there is what we would call our HR strategy. What is it that we want to do customized for our business, customized for our organization, where we want to take our company in terms of its culture. So what you're saying is that using the Employment Act and labor laws as a foundation, then we build up there to customize something for the company. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's very true.
All right. Now, then somebody, if I may expound on this a bit more before we go to our next point, then what would make the difference between, would there be a difference, say, between a company working in different companies working in different industries? For example, a retail outlet like Naivas, if I could use that as an example, and a consultancy like Aurum Consultants. What do you think would be the difference in terms of HR policies for companies working in different industries?
When you're looking at the policies, I think different industries or different companies would have different models of operations. Now, there are some guidelines that cut across board. However, you will find there are some areas that are really specific to the industry or to the business that I am running. So you have to look at the business and see what are the needs of this business, what are the kind of operations we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and how do we want to manage these operations when people are concerned and we are having to deal with the employee on a day-to-day basis on our operations. So yes, there are some that would cut across, but there are some that would probably be entirely different in terms of our processes. So we have to come down to the industry, and like you have mentioned, you have to look at the organization strategy, you have to look at the HR strategy and see then how do you marry the HR policies and ensure as an organization you're covered from every angle.
Okay. Okay. So, to our listeners out there who are listening to us, who want to understand, okay, we have HR policies, they are critical for our operations, but then how do I customize it for my company? How do I customize it for my industry? Then what we are saying is, then you have to, first of all, understand the Employment Act, the labor laws that have been put in place in our country. That is where you begin. When you want to start hiring people into your company, you've got to start with understanding of the Employment Act. What are the statutory, before you step out, the way you drive a car, before you drive a car, you've got to get a driving license. You've got to get the insurance for the vehicle. Same thing, you're starting up a business, you're running a business, you've got to understand what are the things to look out for. If the government came after you, do you have everything in place? So now that brings us to the second question, that as a HR manager or as a business owner, where do you start? I'm sure some of our listeners, some of the people who are watching us are wondering, okay, you've discussed about HR policies and all that, but now, where do I start?
So let me start by saying, Anthony, that first you must define the key areas of what you want to capture on your HR manual. And it goes back to your earlier question. So what are the areas you want to capture on this HR manual? Depending on your operations, depending on the industry you are. So that's where you start. Yeah. Define the key areas. So state what the policies are. What would be the policies that you're looking at having in that manual, and what do they say? On those policies, what is the procedure for each policy? Define what happens when these policies are broken. Because you have to remember, these are policies that are supposed to govern your employees while working for you, for them to understand this is how we behave when we are in the work environment. So these are the policies that already the organization has put in place. These are the procedures for these policies. If these policies are broken or they are not adhered to, then what are the consequences of that? What will happen if I don't adhere to these policies as an employee and even as an employer, so that there's a standardization on how we handle employees and how we manage employees. You have to have these policies guide you, because you can imagine a scenario where, it's not structured how we handle, for example, a disciplinary issue. So today I'm handling a disciplinary issue in one way, but tomorrow I'm handling it totally in a different way because there's no clear structure. So it's haphazard. So you need to have these structures that are very clear. This is how we handle this specific issue. So when this happens, this is a policy, this is a procedure of how we go about it. And if these policies have been broken, then these are some of the consequences that could accompany some of these actions. And a good set of HR policies and procedures, again, you have to remember, they have to be a governing entity. And this is a living document. So it's not a document you come up with and you put it on the shelves for the sake of it. It's a living document that guides you day to day. It should be the current definition of how the company operates.
All right, all right. Now, first of all, thank you, Orowe Onege. I can see your comment. You've said very informative, following from the Marion schools. Karibu sana. Indeed, the issues of from Zippy, probably you could give us. Imagine I am a startup. Okay, I've begun business. I have my goal. My main goal is the business that I want to do, the business idea that I want to execute, actualize, move on with it. But now but now I realize I've got to hire people. And then somebody tells me, Tommy, as you hire people, remember there is the Employment Act. You're no longer hiring the way we used to do Zamani Zakale. You've got to follow procedures. So explain to me, how do I go about this? I have no idea about HR. I just know I call somebody, sit them down, look at their CV, see whether they meet the criteria, see whether I like them. They might have the CV, but when I look at them, I'm thinking, I don't need this. I need something looking in a certain way. And then if I like whatever I get, I tell them, okay, you are my this and that. This is what will pay you. This is when I want you to work, and that's it. And then within a short while, there are issues. So can you probably guide our listeners and our viewers? How do they proceed in getting the HR manuals and stuff like that?
So, Anthony, let me start by saying, first of all, when we start businesses, a lot of times we don't even think about some of these things until we actually have a problem at hand, or our team has grown and we start realizing we are having challenges with our employees and we don't know how to handle these issues. This might not be very clearly defined in the law on how do we handle a certain issue. So again, what I would encourage any person really starting a business, it's important to start thinking about these things when you're already setting the plan and the strategy for your business. Because there's no business without people. Eventually, you will end up engaging people. And I've dealt with business owners who have started by engaging the first employee and they've said, I want to do things right. I want to set the standards so that the standards are the same across board, so that I'm not having to engage employees haphazardly initially. Then all of a sudden I'm thinking I need to bring a structure in place. So it's always good for you to start thinking, I need to put some structure in place even when I'm beginning. Sometimes it can be a little too much for someone just starting the business and they're thinking, I don't have the resources or I don't know how to do this. The first place to start, of course, is the Employment Act. You look at what the Employment Act says and see, am I working within the boundaries of these laws that govern our employment? Then I go deeper and say, as my business starts growing, I need to put structures in place. I need to put HR structures in place. I need to have policies and procedures. Because you could be having that one employee. You don't have a clear process. You don't have a clear procedure. They are a bit confused. They don't know what happens when I have an indiscipline issue. Then you handle indiscipline in a way that actually poses a risk to the organization. I've had scenarios where, a client has called and has said, as my right, I want to exercise my right and I want to terminate this employee because they are stealing, and I just want to tell them, you know what, we cannot work together anymore. Just take your dues and walk away, okay? Now, you find that approach will have challenges for you as an employer because you have not defined what is the procedure of terminating someone. And again, you have to refer back to the Employment Act. And I've said, yes, it's your right as an employer to let an employee go. But what is the procedure you are following? Is this procedure well known by your employees? Do they know if I do this, I will be subjected to disciplinary procedure, and this is how the disciplinary procedure works, and I will end up being terminated if I'm found guilty. So again, at the end of the day, it might look like it's big out there, but it's important for any business that is looking at growing to have HR policies, to have policies that will govern your people. Otherwise, you'll create confusion and people will end up being unhappy because of how issues are being handled.
All right, all right. That's very clear. Now, for our listeners who are listening to us, remember when you're starting a business, you've got to, I'm sure you have a business plan where you're saying, I have this product that I'm selling, or I have this off service that I'm offering, and you come up with a HR, I mean, you come up with a financial plan. You probably have a financial focusing projection. You get somebody who is a good financial planner to help you come up with a financial projection. You have a marketing strategy. You have all those kind of things put in place. So you also need to remember that you need to have a HR policy put together, because at the end of the day, unless you're going to use robots to enable you get your products to the market, inevitably you will need people. Even those robots will need people to manage them. So if you're going to use people, and most people say that their staff are their most important assets, then it's important for you to know, how do I deal then with these assets? How do I hire? How do I remunerate? How do I handle discipline? How do I handle, promotion? How do I handle, exits? And this is where we as Aurum consultants come in. We are able to guide you. We are able to guide you into this process. If you do not know how to go about it, we'll be able to work with you step by step so that you do not fall into some of these significant pitfalls that the law, especially the new constitution, has in part played in empowering employees. Now, we have now the question here. What are the key elements of HR policies? Right, we have decided we're going to have a policy. We're going to ask Aurum consultants to help us, or we are going to hire a HR manager to help us set up a policy. Then what are the key elements? Somebody would wonder, what is it that we're supposed to put in them to make sure that they are as efficient as possible for our company?
Let me start by saying that HR most important role is to be compliant with any employment laws. And this should be the goal for any HR, it should be the goal for any employer, to be compliant. Now, not following the laws will leave you vulnerable for lawsuits. And of course, the last thing you want as an employer is to have lawsuits that are coming from employees. While these are actually things that can be prevented, you have to remember, where there are people, we have to have guidelines and laws governing our behavior. We have to have guidelines dictating how do we deal with each other. So when you're looking at the elements that will be covered on your HR manual, you must first look at your industry, the organization that you're running, and see these are actually the needs that we need to make sure they are covered. Okay, so one of the things I would say, you need to look at the conditions of employment. Now, this might not be really specific to any industry, although the details of it might be specific to the industry or to the organization. But conditions of employment is something that you need to make sure it's covered within your HR manual. And employees know these are the conditions of employment in our organization. Now, on the conditions of employment, what we cover, we look at things like general employee responsibilities, for instance. We look at what is a code of conduct for employees in this organization. We look at what are the working hours. Yes, that is dictated probably in the employment contract, but you also don't want to make assumptions. So you make sure also your working hours are covered within your employment or HR manual. You look at things like leaves, the organization policy on leaves. Yes, the law requires us to give our employees leave, and it only talks about the number of leave days, the minimum number of leave days you can give an employee. The organization that will come up with a policy and say, we are not giving 21 days, we are giving 25 days, or we are giving 30 days to our employees. But how do we make sure then that is understood by all employees? And how do we ensure employees know this is the procedure for taking leave? Can an employee just wake up in the morning and decide I've gone on leave? What is the procedure of applying for that leave? What is the procedure of approving for that leave? What is the procedure for different leaves? What kind of leaves do you cover in an organization? Of course, you'll find, for example, there are annual leaves. Okay. There are things like sick leave. How do I go for a sick leave? If I happen to be unwell, then what is the procedure for the company for me to take a sick leave? If I need to go for maternity leave or paternity leave, what is the procedure? Can I wake up in the morning and decide, because I'm expecting, I have decided to take my maternity leave, 2 weeks earlier, So what are the procedures and what are the policies that govern me to be able to take these leaves as an employee? Again, we normally say, for instance, leave is earned. Okay. So again, when you don't define that very clearly on your manual, employees will know I'm entitled to, for example, 21 days in a year. So can I take that leave in the beginning of the year? So these are things as an organization or as a company, you need to define very clearly so that, again, as employees, we know this is when I can take the leave. This is how I apply for the leave. And can I take this leave when it's not approved, for instance? Or do I need to make sure the leave is approved for me to take? So you find these are the things actually that sometimes end up bringing in discipline issue or disciplinary matters to HR offices, just simply because there are not clear guidelines on how do we handle these issues. And from the employee's perspective, they don't understand. And as an employer, if you have not made it clear for the employee, then how will you be able to handle these issues when they become an issue? Okay. These are quite a number of other things that we will need to cover on the HR manual. The other thing I will look at is employee relations. Okay.
Right.
And I know this is a subject that we cannot exhaust in this podcast. It's a wide subject that we'll probably need to cover on a series of conversations. But I will cover employee relations. When you look at, for example, disciplinary, if an employee has a disciplinary issue, where do we start? And we need to ask ourselves, is it okay for me to just dish out warning letters and eventually take this employee home? Is that the way, or is that the best way of handling a disciplinary issue? So we need to define as an organization, this is our disciplinary procedure. This is a policy. This is a procedure. This is how we handle the whole process from A to Z. When you look at things like, for example, suspension, at what point do you suspend an employee? Is that clearly defined in your manual? Do employees know these are the reasons why I could end up being suspended? And what would be the procedure to lead to that suspension? The other thing I would look is terminations and resignations from employees. When I resign from an organization, when I terminate, my contract or is terminated, then what is the procedure? What is the procedure of clearing from the company? How do I get my terminal dues? What is the period that will take for me to get what is owed to me? Those are things that you need to define clearly in your employment manual. When you look at employee relations against something else, for example, like sexual harassment, how do you handle such kind of scenarios in an organization? So if it has happened, then what is the procedure? Where does the HR manager start if such a case is brought to their table? If it's not clearly defined, then again, it becomes a challenge. So these are things that, again, we need to make sure, they are very clear. The other area I would look at would be recruitment and selection. And again, I know we have had a podcast where we discuss about employment or recruitment and selection of employees. But again, as an organization, is there a clear plan? Is there a clear structure? Is there a clear policy of this is how we go about recruitment? When a position has arisen, how do we identify this position? How do we go about advertising and getting candidates? Do we give opportunities first to the internal candidates, or do we go outrightly and get candidates from outside? Do we engage a consultant to help us with recruitment? What is our policy? What is our procedure for getting people? How do we ensure there's equal opportunity for all employees who are coming to work for us? Again, these are things that we need to clearly define in our HR manual. When you're looking at, for example, probation periods, okay, different cadres, for example, might have to go through different seasons of probation. The period, again, depends. I mean, the labor law is clear. Is 6 months, it can be extended to a year, but you will find the organizations that will allow lesser months, for example. Is that clearly captured in your HR manual? So that, again, you don't end up having issues of discrimination because one person got 3 months probation, another one got 5 months probation or 6 months probation. What is your guiding principle? What is your guidelines for you to actually use this? The other thing that I would say would be an element or something that I would cover in that manual would be remuneration. When it comes to salaries, how do you remunerate your employees? Is there a clear salary structure? What is a guiding principle of how I give remuneration to these employees? How do we handle promotions? How do we handle salary increments? How do we handle, performance evaluations that will lead to increments? These are things we need to make sure they are embedded on the HR manual so that, again, it's an open book. It's not a secret of some, and other people don't know what is happening in this organization, and it creates chaos or confusion. Okay. Now, there are other things, and it's many, it's wide. It's a wide topic, Anthony. I mean, training, what are our approaches to training? How do we do training and needs analysis for our team members? How do we look at confidential information? How do we look at conflict of interest? There's a lot that you need to look at. And I've said, as an organization, you find there are some things that would cut across, but there's a lot of other things that you need to look at the specific organization and see this is where, this is where the boundaries we need to work within and come up with a document that will be a guiding principle for our employees and our employer.
Wow. Those are very deep items that you've covered. I like the fact, the thing that you're saying here, and to our listeners, I'm sure this, if you're listening, I'm sure you'd have captured this, what Zippy has just said, that the HR manual should be an open book. It should not be a secret. It should not be something hidden, an eyes-only document. No, the HR manual should be an open book, available and most likely being taught or being discussed within the company. The HR section ought to be able to periodically remind the management and staff that this is what it is. So I like the fact that what you've said about the key elements of the HR policies. We are talking about, if I could go, summarize what you've just said. We're talking about employee responsibilities. We are talking about things like working hours. We're talking about recruitment and selection, probation policies. We're talking about remuneration. We're talking about employee relations, terminations, and resignations. It's a whole lot of issues. And as you've said, we cannot be able to cover them all today. But to our listeners, we welcome your views. We welcome your comments about this. And if you're a business person running your business, or if you are hired as a manager and you do not have an employment, a HR manual, this is the time to be able to put it in place. And especially during this season when things are in a flux, we are not sure about whether we'll return to what we used to call normal. Take this opportunity to be able to put certain things in place so that, as most companies claim, that their employees are their major assets, then put something in place to know how to guide yourself into it. Because when you have a happy a contented workforce that knows exactly where they stand when they want to go for leave, they have a clear idea of the procedure to proceed for leave, how many days they're entitled to, what they're entitled to when they're on leave, and when they come back, where are they stationed. If it's issues to do with, you've said about remuneration, the salary grades that are there, the promotion procedures that are guideline, that all this, if they put in place, then you have a workforce that is enjoying its place in its in the company. Now, as we conclude, what would you say essentially to people, to business owners, business managers who are out there, who are wondering, okay, thank you for what you've given me, but now what next? What would you say to them?
I think, Anthony, even before I say what next or what they can do, let me say, like I've said earlier, an HR manual is a living document. Mm-hmm. It's a day-to-day document that you have to keep on referring to. Some organizations might have these policies actually in place already. But are they even up to date? You look at your policies, are they updated? Because you don't want to be using policies that you created 5-10 years ago and they're already outdated. You need to look at them and say, are they current? Are they can we still use these policies? Do they make sense? Like you've mentioned, for example, in the times we're living in, we've gotten into a situation where we are having to send employees to work from home. Do we even have any policy guidelines helping us to understand this is a framework we work within? If I'm working from home, these are my expectations from the employer. These are the guidelines that should be followed if I'm going to work from the home environment. We are looking at, for example, COVID-19 guidelines. As a nature, do I have policies that are guiding me in this new, era of having to work? So we also need to make sure we are reviewing our HR manuals on a regular basis so that they are current documents. Again, we are looking at the labor laws that keep on changing. Right now, we are having the labor laws that are being reviewed. So again, are you ensuring, you're keeping up and ensuring whatever manuals you have put in place, and again, they are relevant. Now, from employers who might not have this kind of a document, where do you start? You start from the basics, look at your business, look at your people. Some of us have silent policies that are non-written,
Yes.
And these are policies that people know this is how we do things here. You need to formalize that and put it in writing and make sure it's a clear guideline for all your employees. Okay. If you don't have any manuals in place, then, start by the simple things, like, for example, I said the things that put us in a lot of challenges, like disciplinary, start putting simple policies in place. This is how we handle our disciplinaries. This is a procedure we follow. Okay. Yes. When it comes to recruitment, it's another very interesting topic. How do you ensure your employees who are within the organization don't feel that they are not being given an opportunity to grow? How do you ensure you put policies in place that would govern, this is how we recruit? We look at people internally first, and this is how we look at it. These are the qualifications that will be required. Then we move on with the, recruitment process. Okay. Look at, for example, leaves. I've had scenarios where, employees from different clients would ask me, so I've been working here for the last 4 months. Can I take my leave? As an organization, is it possible for you to define clearly, you can only take your leave after probation, or are you allowed to take your leave within probation? And what kind of leave can you expense during that period? Can you make it clear for your employees so that it does not complicate your relationship with your employees? So again, you'll realize these policies help our relationships become better. It helps make our relationships not too complicated. But when you don't have a guideline, then it becomes too complex because now you're having to deal with issues as and when they arise. And when you start dealing with issues like that, you find sometimes there's no consistency in how you're going to handle your issues, and you'll end up having issues of discrimination. So I would say start from the basics. If you need support, of course, we are here. We'll be able to support you and put basic guidelines, put basic HR policies in place for you. Train your employees so that they can understand, then this is how we should work within these guidelines. Then, it will help your organization move to the next level because there's a framework of how people work within that organization.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Mike Wanjohi. I can see your comment from Marion Schools. You've said that you're following. We appreciate the fact that you're logged in. And I want to, as we conclude, I like the way you've put it. And what I would want, the analogy that came to my mind as you were talking is that of our roads out here. We have rules for how to drive. In Kenya, we drive on the left. Okay? There are rules on how to overtake. There are rules on what happens when you reach a T-junction. There are rules on how to enter the road. There are rules on who has right of way. So that if they are followed, then we have an orderly transport system. However, if you're out there and you do not have a HR manual, I guess you're operating like a boda driver. Because boda bodas will decide, Leo, I have taken a client, I need to go back this way. It doesn't matter whether it's on the wrong side or not, whether it's on the pavement, I will drive the way I want. I will overtake the way I want. I will stop the way I want. And if somebody asks me, I will tell them, don't bother with me. I have right of way. And as we all know, that is a recipe for confusion and disaster. So to our listeners, if you're with us, if you really like what we've discussed today, you can connect with us on consult@aurumconsultants.co.ke. Send us an email You can send us your comments on Facebook, on LinkedIn. We would appreciate them. If you want to hear more of what we're discussing, I think we might need to do this topic again, next week to see how we'll proceed. Yes. So, Zippy, do you have a final comment as we close?
What I would say is, even as organizations, you look at doing your HR manual. I think it's also important for you to know you have people within the organization. Okay, so also consult with them. Yes. You might need to give them guidance by coming up with the framework of the document. Okay, or do the draft document. Share it with them and allow them to give you their input into the same. Because you have to remember, they have to own the policies, they have to own the processes, because they will be the implementers and especially your managers. So it's important to also make sure you consult with them and make sure you get their input in coming with these policies. So you can also sit in the HR office and say, I'm going to come up with this document alone, I'm going to implement it, I'm going to do all this. It's important for you to also consult the people you're working with so that their input is also taken into consideration, because it's important.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Now that is very good. That if now you decide to put up a manual, you want to have things in place, and probably already a big company, consult your senior managers. Tell them, give me input on issues to do with leave, input to dealing with disciplinaries, dealing with promotions, dealing with probation, dealing with employee issues here and there. And then if you have a HR department or you'd like to engage a HR consultant, then now within that framework, you can come up with something that meets the Employment Act, but at the same time is customized for your business. Now we have come to the end of our program. We are very appreciative for those of you who logged in. We appreciate the comments that came in. And as we said, we welcome your comments. You can follow us on Aurum Consultants on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. You can shoot your comments on the email address that is put there below. Even you can give us a call or send a text on the same. So we look forward to doing this next week, same time, same place. Thank you for logging in and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.